Liz Farrell. From the Murdaugh podcast tweeted, "Not enough people talk about Paul Murdaugh's Timmy mode, BTW. Clearly it's a South Park reference, but why did his hands do that when he drank in excess? In 2019, I started trying to get answers but never found anything definitive thoughts. I'd love to examine your fraud," commented. "It might be stemming, almost like hand flapping for those on the autism spectrum." Paul was a handful even as a little boy, a family member told the Post. "I saw him snap at least once," the family member said. "He told his Aunt Nancy to go fuck herself. It was about 10 years ago and he would have been around 11. I was alone with him and maybe a few other kids were there. I was on his case about it, but he said he didn't give a shit. He did not take authority well." Hello, True Crime Stories family podcast. Welcome back. Alex Murdaugh was looking at himself in the mirror. Paul Murdaugh was a reflection of Alex because they shared so many of the same dysfunctional behavior patterns, although Paul was different in some ways. People commented on the video called The Inconvenient Truth about Paul Murdaugh. They wanted to know how I could say that Paul was the black sheep of the family when they both had similar dysfunctional behaviors, mental illnesses, and ruined the Murdaugh's family name. I agree with you guys. Alex and his son Paul did have some of the same reckless behavior patterns and personality disorders in common, although Alex didn't have the same social and intellectual disabilities that Paul was born with. Paul was the black sheep of the family because he was born with disabilities that may have contributed to him being known to be an out-of-control kid in his family, in school, and in the community since he was little kid. Alex became a lawyer and tried to keep the Murdaugh's legacy and reputation. He was able to hide his addiction and his crimes while appearing as a well-rounded lawyer who was a law-abiding citizen that was helping people. It took almost 2 decades for him to get caught. His financial crimes did not come to light until decades later. He was very manipulative and sneaky, planning and plotting to prey on all of his victims ahead of time. Paul was more erratic and out in the open with his crimes and bad behavior. He was known to have behavior issues since he was a child and did not respect people in authority. Paul also couldn't bond with people. He was single at the time he died and only had one girlfriend his whole life up until the boat crash. Paul's girlfriend Morgan broke up with him and cut off all contact with him after the boat crash. He was very violent towards her, putting his hands around her neck and doing other violent things to her. She said that her friend Mallory Beach, who died in the boat crash, saved her life. Sadie888 commented on the video called Maggie's Murdaugh's Life of Luxury and said, "This is the first I have heard of Paul being autistic. Interesting. Where did you get that info? I do think his whole hand thing was a lot of skimming, but I never thought he was diagnosed anything but possible ADHD." Sadie888. "I have heard the same thing about Paul. Paul was diagnosed with ADHD because Alex complained about it. He was never diagnosed with autism, although they never got him therapy to learn any emotional or coping skills for his ADHD. People speculated that Paul Murdaugh had autism based on his behavior, hand gestures, and the fact that he had ADHD that was left untreated his whole life. Paul's behavior did exhibit signs of being on the autism spectrum, like when he turned into Timmy and threw his hands up and held them out, then his eyes would get real big. It's also common for a child with ADHD to have autism too. Listen to Alex complain about Paul's ADHD.
Myself, what was the biggest issue you had with Paul when you had to call him down and scold him or correct him? What was the biggest issue you had with Paul?
Irresponsibility. He was ADHD. He was bad about jumping from, and he had so many wonderful qualities now, but he was bad about jumping from, he'd start this, maybe not quite finish it, do something else. And, you'll find out from his friends he had clothes strung out all over the state. He did that with clothes, he did that with guns, he did that with my boats.
Lost.
So.
He lost what?
He would misplace stuff or just, leave stuff behind, right?
Yes, everywhere. I mean, he would go off for the weekend. Sometimes he wouldn't pack clothes because he's got clothes in somebody's house. I mean, Paul was one, he wouldn't understand how you go out, you and a girl go out on a date. He liked the crowd.
Who was his girlfriend?
He didn't have a girlfriend right now.
Okay.
On the day of Paul's death, Alex said him, and Paul talked about Paul having high blood pressure that was left untreated because Alex said he refused to go see a doctor, and that was a huge deal with Maggie. His mom was worried sick about him and wanted to make him go see a doctor because Paul's feet were getting swollen and he was under a lot of stress from the boat crash, but Alex said he didn't want to get therapy either. Alex said when Paul was out, people would go up to him and confront him by saying things like, "You're going to tell me who was driving that boat. You piece of shit, you were driving that boat." Did you know that Paul had other brushes with the law? The 22-year-old had other brushes with the law in addition to being charged in the 2019 drunken boat crash that took the life of Mallory Beach. According to records obtained by the Island Packet and Beaufort Gazette, Paul was pulled over and received a traffic ticket in May 2020 for driving more than 15 miles over the speed limit. He was fined for a minor boating violation in Charleston County, and he was caught drinking by cops in 2017. He received a citation for possession of alcohol by a minor. He received a ticket for boating for an expired fire extinguisher near Shem Creek in Charleston County. Records show the ticket was tied to a 2008 Scout boat owned by Alex Murdaugh. This was a different boat from the one involved in the 2019 crash. It was a 2006 Sea Hunt also owned by Alex, the Island Packet and Beaufort Gazette reported. Paul was fined, and there was no evidence showing that alcohol was related. Did you know that more than half of all individuals who have been diagnosed with autism also have signs of ADHD? In fact, ADHD is the most common coexisting condition in children with autism. A quarter of children with ADHD have low-level signs of autism, which might include having difficulty with social skills or being very sensitive to clothing textures. Why do ADHD and autism coexist so often, and what are the similarities between them? Both ADHD and autism are neurodevelopmental disorders where brain development has been affected in some way. That means both disorders affect the central nervous system, which is responsible for movement, language, memory, social, and focusing skills. A number of scientific studies have shown that the two conditions often coexist. Autism, or autism spectrum disorder, refers to a broad range of conditions characterized by challenges with social skills, repetitive behaviors, speech, and nonverbal communication. According to the Centers for Disease Control, autism affects an estimated 1 in 36 children in the United States today. Autistic behavior and stimming or self-stimulatory behavior is repetitive or unusual body movements or noises. This helps some autistic children and teenagers manage their emotions and cope with overwhelming situations. You might be able to reduce the need to stim by changing the environment. Paul's brain development was affected after birth, and he demonstrated signs of stimming on the boat before the boat crash, a sign that he was emotionally overwhelmed and he needed to get out of that environment fast. Stimming might also include hand and finger mannerisms, for example, finger flicking and hand flapping, unusual body movements, for example, rocking back and forth while sitting or standing, holding hands or fingers out at an angle or arching the back while sitting. Visual stimulation includes looking at something sideways, watching an object spin, or fluttering fingers near the eyes. It also includes repetitive behavior like opening and closing doors or flicking switches, chewing or mouthing objects, listening to the same song or noise over and over. Many autistic children and teenagers stim, although stimming varies a lot among children. For example, some children just have mild hand mannerisms, but others may spend a lot of time stimming. Stimming can also vary depending on the child. For example, some children stim or stim more when they're feeling stressed or anxious. Stimming helps autistic children and teenagers manage emotions like anxiety, anger, fear, and excitement. Stimming might help them to calm down because it focuses their attention on the stim or produces a calming change in their bodies. Stimming might also help children manage overwhelming sensory information. For autistic children who are overly sensitive to sensory information, stimming can reduce sensory overload because it focuses their attention on just one thing. For autistic children who are undersensitive, stimming can stimulate underactive senses. We all use stimming sometimes. For example, some children suck their thumbs or twirl their hair for comfort, and others jiggle their legs while they're working on a difficult problem or task. You might pace up and down if you're anxious, or fiddle with a pen in a boring meeting. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.